Hello, this is Wylam with the FPV podcast. I am back on talking about DRL again. So we are in the finals for the Atlanta Aftermath. Some really great racing. So just like last time, this is all off the cuff, unedited, and just my quick thoughts. If you haven't seen the episode, you should definitely watch that before watching this or listening to this. In the finals right now, we have A-Nub, Gab, Wild Willie, Jaws, Etma 20, and Nurk. During the episode, there were plenty of pilot spotlights, and I really enjoyed each of them. Probably one of my favorite spotlights that happened was Gab's spotlight, in which he had to recover from a lipo fire that burned down his house. It was great to see the background of that story and also, what he had to do in order to get back to drone racing again and the amazing success that he's having right now. A couple of things that I wish they did talk about during that spotlight was taking care of the lipos, lipo safety. Those are things that pretty much anybody who getting into drone racing should know about because it is that dangerous sometimes. And also how the community responded to that fire because there was a GoFundMe account. So many people contributed to help get Gab back on his feet. It was awesome. Kind of wish that they highlighted those two things in his spotlight, but it was still very interesting and really enjoyed almost all of the spotlights that they did. So let's go ahead and get right into the racing because that's what the finals is all about. Right from the get-go on Heat 1, A-Nub and Gab, they just pretty much picked up right where they left off. They were competing head-to-head. They were so close. They were just at a different level. Coming in at third place was Wild Willie, and you can tell that he was a bit behind. He was like almost 2 to 3 seconds behind. And after the heat was done, he was like, wow, they were just at a completely different level. So you can tell there was a big difference in competition from Group 1 to Group 2 in Episode 1 of Atlanta Aftermath. So you can really tell that Willie knew that he needed to pick up his game if he wanted to compete with those two going through the remaining heats. Now going into the second heat, things got really interesting because it didn't play out like it did last time. So the gravity gate, they kind of highlighted that at the very beginning, and there was a reason for that because in the second heat there was a lot of crashes at the gravity gate. Pretty much all of the leaders wiped themselves out at the gravity gate. Some of them were able to pick back up in racing, but that really left the door open for the remaining pilots, which made the whole entire episode much more interesting. You can also tell that A-Nub is a lot quieter when Jet's not around. He's more focused. Maybe he's more, intent on trying to get that first place finish. You can tell that, coming in first place is really important to him, and that was his mission when he went into the finals. Going into the third heat, A-Nub had a crash with another pilot right at the very beginning of the heat, and that really took him out of position, so he wasn't really going to compete for first place, and this really affected him for the remainder of the race. It really took him off his game. Gab got out of this just fine and was able to really start building up his lead at this point. With A-Nub out, it really opened the door for Jaws and Nurk to make a run at podium. So at this point, Nurk could really try to flesh out his strategy, his strategy of flying his own race, waiting for other people to make that big mistake was really starting to come into fruition here. It's very interesting to see this strategy play out because I've been watching it for the last year and a half now, and it's worked at, some of the world championships. It was kind of interesting to see if it was going to work at DRL, and it looked like it was going to work for this race. And I think part of the reason why it does work for this race is the scoring system. The system in terms of points isn't weighted towards the top. So having a strategy in which you're always just finishing, accumulating points makes a lot of sense. And, he enjoys sticking to that strategy. That's one of his, major strengths is that he's willing to commit to a strategy and not change. It's something that's really difficult to do, and he's used it to great success in almost all levels of racing. Now, having said all that, Gab is at this point starting to really accumulate a lot of points, building that lead, and it's pretty much his race to lose once he gets into that kind of a momentum. As the racing progresses into the fourth heat, A-Nub had a great, almost perfect launch. Unfortunately, he pushed too hard and he crashed out again. And really, at this point, this gave Gab a mountain of a lead, and it's a lead that he won't relinquish for the rest of the race. It opened up the spot for Nurk to come in at second place. But really, the big story from this point going on is the fact that Anub really has put himself out of contention. You can really tell that he put a lot of energy into trying to get first place. He was really ready to battle Gab for first place in every one of the heats. But when he started, having that bad luck of getting a midair crash and then crashing out in this heat, it really started to affect him, and it just seems like he wasn't able to pick himself back up. One of the things to actually note is that Jet isn't in the final. So, we all know that Jet and Anub are really good friends, and it just felt like, probably Jet would have come over, patted him on the back or kicked him in the butt or something like that and told him to get back into the game. But unfortunately, that just didn't happen. In sports, we talk a lot about mental toughness. And in this particular case, I think, Anub didn't have the mental toughness to focus and get back into the game because from this point out, he pretty much wasn't in contention to really challenge for first place or even podium at this point. And it's one of those things in racing is so easy to lose, if you just run into a really bad streak of luck. So at this point, it's pretty much Gab's race to lose, as I've already said. But things did get a little interesting in the fifth heat, in which he actually collided with Wild Willie in the hardest part of the track. And the reason why I bring this up is because of the place where the midair collision actually happened. It happened in the most challenging part of the track, in the smallest, tightest space of the track. And in sports racing, there's taking risks, there's taking major risks, and then there's taking risks that actually endangers another contestant, or in this case, another pilot, right? And this falls into the third category. Now, we all know Wild Willie, he flies fast, he flies hard, and he enjoys taking his risks. But it felt like watching the slow motion that was a risk that really should not have been taken. If this was an auto race, the drivers would have come out of their cars and started throwing punches because it was, in my view, an unnecessary risk. At that venture, at that point, that's just too big of a risk to try to pass at that point. And if there was a midair collision, there was a high chance that it would take both pilots out. So for Wild Willie, it probably wasn't really something he was thinking about. But when you watch it in slow motion, you're like, oh man, that was a big risk that should not have happened. Now, if Gab hadn't had that huge lead, it could have really affected him. Really, at that point, Gab did stand a small chance of not getting first. He was already guaranteed second, but, going back to back in wins is like something that's never been done before. I'm sure Gab wanted to do that. In that collision, even though there wasn't, anything big said about it, at that point, it could have been something huge, and it just felt like that collision shouldn't have happened. That was a risk that as a pilot you shouldn't take because it could have forced, both of your standings to be in major jeopardy. But then again, it's just Wild Willie living up to his name, right? He's one of the type of pilots who enjoys taking risk, and he usually comes out ahead, but every once in a while he doesn't, and that's kind of racing. You really can't race without taking a lot of risk. And that's one of the things that you see at the top of the level is that every pilot needs to accept some level of risk and be able to go for it. There's very few pilots that can take absolutely no risk and still finish in the top three. It just doesn't happen. The feel-good story of this episode is definitely Nurk, in which he came back from just barely squeaking in to getting a second place finish. So his strategy of flying his own race, taking advantage of other people's mistakes definitely helped him out. He wasn't trying to get first place. He wasn't pushing hard. He was just making sure that he can do the best he possibly could, and coming in at second place really validated that he belongs. Although looking at his racing record, didn't really feel like he needed that validation, but it's always good to stand up there and have a podium position in the biggest league in the world. The last tidbit that I'm going to talk about is towards the end, and it was something that it was just kind of funny. On the final heat, Gab crashed out, and when he crashed out, it looked like he made a major mistake. But during his last interviews before the episode wrapped up, he talked about how he heard one of the pilots crash out, and he only needed 1 point to finish in first place. So when he heard that pilot crash out when he's racing, his mind did the math and he knew he won the race. He didn't even have to finish in order to win the race because he just needed to come in fifth place to win. So what happened? He got distracted and he crashed out. Now, getting distracted and crashing out is a bad thing, obviously, but the fact that he had the situational awareness to actually know what's going on around him while being able to fly in first place, on a record setting pace is kind of amazing. It kind of shows that he has more left in the tank and there's just more good racing, or the faster, or he can actually go faster. One of the little funny side stories there. It really goes to show that how in tune a lot of these pilots are with everything around them, not just what's going on in their goggles. They're probably able to take in more feedback if they actually had spotters there. So again, it still would be very interesting to see if they're going to incorporate some sort of spotter system or communication system with the pilots at some time during, maybe 2018, in which they just add another level of complexity or another level of, something going wrong or something going right. It'll be interesting to see. So those are my quick thoughts for the day, and I hope you enjoyed the little tidbits that I have, and thank you so much for listening, and we'll enjoy looking forward to the next week on New Orleans for level 3.